Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and that means Friday Reads, a venerable BookTube tradition where we talk about what we've read recently, what we are currently reading, what we're planning on reading right around the corner. Informally, of course, no one's holding you to your Friday Reads plans. And as you know, if you watch as many BookTube channels as I do, you've seen that it's a popular thing to do. The subscription queue, mine anyway, on Fridays is always full of great videos of people just talking about giving a lay of the land for their reading at the moment. It's the one time of the week where we sort of touch base with what we're all doing in terms of reading. And I love to do it too. Mine is a little more complicated because I spend more time reading than most people on BookTube, and that gets a lot of books done. Those of you who are new to my channel maybe don't know, I am a professional book critic. That's all I do. Aside from taking care of my little dog, that's all I do. Whereas everybody else has loved ones and mistresses and school schedules and jobs and lives and hygiene and whatnot. And I don't have any of that. So a Friday Reads that was as complete as some that I see on other channels, for me, would be unwieldy. So I give just sort of a thumbnail impression. I'm happy to do it because that's interesting too. I want to start off with some oldies from some older stuff. Of course, a large amount of what I'll read this weekend will be new or forthcoming. But some older stuff too. Some of which is connected to book hauls that I've done recently on this channel. At one point I showed you this. I found Away All Boats, a World War II naval novel that I found at the Brattle in absolutely perfect condition. So I haven't read it in forever and ever, so I grabbed it. I did reread it, and boy, oh boy, boy, oh boy, did I love it. And it reminded me of other nautical stuff. But before I can even get to other nautical stuff, I found another great nautical novel at the Brattle. I found Mutiny on the Bounty. Almost certainly these came from the same person. Almost certainly they did. But I reread Mutiny on the Bounty as well, and it was also, just fantastic. And that got my my blood up. That got me in the mood for nautical fiction. And I grabbed, this was not a complete reread. This was one of those rereads where I read a bit and then another bit, rather than hunker down and read the whole thing. I will do that sometime in the next year, but I've read this just recently. This is The Cruel Sea by Nicholas Montserrat. These are very much of a type. And this is also a World War II maritime piece of fiction, and probably better written than either of the other two, and just a gut punch of a book. Fantastic. And including some incredible set piece scenes. Just amazing. Though, if any of you have read, I don't know how many people read Montserrat anymore. He's totally out of print. But I don't know how many of you have ever read this book, but there are some set piece scenes in here that you just don't forget. You just don't. And one of the standout ones has nothing to do with naval action. It's a confrontation between the captain of the ship, in the main ship in the story, and the captain of a Nazi ship that he sinks and then rescues as many of the crew as he can. And there's a confrontation in the cabin between these two men that is over before you know it. I'm always struck when I reread it how short it is, but boy, oh boy, you'll never forget it. And that had me moving on to this thing, which I hauled on this channel, Delilah, which is another great big, not nearly as well written, but very enjoyable World War II nautical fiction book. And I pulled this down off the shelf. I dipped my toe into the first few chapters. I found this at a free library, so this wasn't anything. It's not a nice hardcover like these other three, but that's okay. Someday the Brattle will provide. And in the meantime, I can certainly read this. So I will be reading this today, just sinking into that, just the delight of reading nautical fiction. And that had me itching, of course. It had me looking, just standing there looking at the whole shelf of Patrick O'Brian, Aubrey and Maturin novels. Napoleonic era seafaring adventures starring Captain Jack Aubrey and his special friend, the doctor and Irish intelligence agent Stephen Maturin. Starts on Master and Commander and just runs on for 21 books, and it was a supreme temptation. I right now, at the moment, don't have any Hornblower, C.S. Forster's Hornblower novels, also set in the Napoleonic Age of Sail. I don't, at the moment, have any of them. which is kind of weird. What I would like is to find a few really nice period artwork hardcovers for those, or an omnibus edition of some kind, or a couple of the old mass market paperbacks that I used to have, that I used to love. But I don't have any of those. But I was staring at the Aubrey and Maturin books and thinking, because I don't know how, again, I don't know how many of you have read them. They are every bit as good as you have heard they are. They are incredible, just incredible, and of a literary quality that puts even Nicholas Montserrat to shame. They are on a level of their own, just a level of their own in terms of the wit and the sparkle and the speed and the inventiveness, the capaciousness of it all, the human understanding of it all. It's like I always say, if you want a saga done right, give it to an Irishman. But my hand almost went from Master and Commander to just sink myself into a luxurious reread, but I stopped. I stopped myself because, like a lot of you who've emailed me over the months and months, so a lot of you have emailed remembering a feature that used to happen on my channel and Richardson Reads, Mark Richardson's channel, called Two If by Sea, where we just went at nautical stuff, fiction and nonfiction. And we came up with the idea while we were out book hunting, and it suited both of us. Mark and I have both spent an enormous amount of time on the water of the world instead of on land. And I think it was just sort of a natural thing floating around the back of both our minds that we would culminate with a joint read-along, an enormous year-long read-along of the Aubrey and Maturin novels, maybe one book a month. Just a lavishly detailed, affectionately microscopic reading of those books, book by book in that series. And Two If by Sea got shelved because, and it bears repeating here so that you all remember, because Mark is a fairly busy guy. He's a library director, father of a family. He's got a lot to do that's real world kind of outward respectable stuff to do. He's certainly the opposite end of the spectrum from yours truly, who, farts around reading and writing all day long. And so it's these things necessarily have to happen on his timetable. And so that Two If by Sea sort of got tabled, but like a lot of you who've emailed me over the months, I can't imagine doing a long read-along or read-through, especially for BookTube, of the Aubrey and Maturin novels without him. I can't imagine doing that, so I'm not going to. I forced myself not to do that. So I'm going to stick with Delilah for now, and then somewhere here I have a mass market paperback of Das Boot, so I'll reread that. And I'd also like to find, I don't know if I still have it, the famous book Sink the Bismarck. I'd like to reread that, and there are a couple of others as well, like Run Silent, Run Deep, if I can find that at all. I don't know if I have that or any of the other books by that author. He was a terrific author. It'd be great if I could find those. But I'm going to indulge in this for as long as I can, except for Aubrey and Maturin. I'm not going to do that. And another thing that I've been rereading pretty much all week, just luxuriating in it, taking in all the details, looking up in the back and whatnot, the references and whatnot, but mainly just enjoying the company on the page, is something that came to my attention because it was nearly destroyed on my shelf. And I had to fix it, crudely, but I had to fix it. It's The New Testament in Its World by N.T. Wright and Michael Bird, this enormous thing. That is it's a beautiful, full color illustrations everywhere. It's just a beautiful soup to nuts summary of the New Testament. It's provenance, it's parallels, its contradictions, its authors, the typical church-approved pseudo-history around it all, the time period, the historical snapshots of Palestine and Rome and whatnot during this period. Just a big omnium gatherum volume that is just all of the accepted sort of middle-of-the-road normal narrative scholarship about that time and place. We mentioned yesterday I made mention of the debate around the historicity of Jesus. I had a great number of people email me and say, boy, oh boy, am I grateful, even though I am a believing Christian. And you were taking hammer and pitons to the physical existence of the founder of my faith. Even though that's true, I'm really grateful because you obviously weren't doing it to pick at me or insult me or attack me. You're just raising it as a subject. I said myself in the video, and I repeat again whenever it comes up, that your faith is inviolate. Neither I nor anyone else can touch it or should touch it. It's your faith, any of your faith's real world fact claims are necessarily vulnerable. You cannot say, I believe this with all of my heart, and so this is what happened in the year 31 in Palestine. No. You can say, I believe this with all of my heart, and I will want to know more. I will respect it, and I will want to know more about where that belief germinated, about how it reflects in your life, about the challenges that it presents to you. I will ask you questions till the cows come home about that. Because that's your faith, and because it's incredibly important, and I have seen that kind of faith move mountains. You just cannot make the mistake that so many, for instance in America, so many Southern fundamentalist Christians make, of claiming that that faith, the strength with which you hold that, slops over into the physical world and can start to tell me things about the physical world that aren't true, that are factually not true. You can't do that. If you do that, I am going to attack that. And the physical historicity of the man Jesus of Nazareth, is the exact meeting point of those two things. It's the exact meeting point, right, of faith and fact. So naturally, it's a little bit touchy. I'm glad that so many of you, I leave my email in every video, and a lot of people emailed me about that little digression that I made yesterday. I'm glad that all of you got the fact that this is just a subject. It doesn't touch on your faith at all. Not in the slightest. I wouldn't want it to. Not if it's important to you. If you need your faith to get through the day, I want you to have it. I was talking about history, historiography, documents, evidence, that sort of thing. If you, obviously you don't build your religious faith on such things, so they don't come into it. I have known Christians who did. I've known Christians who said, well, I wouldn't believe any of this, except that I think it's physically proven. They are always the most mean and the most bigoted Christians that I've ever met. So I don't imagine that. I don't think any of the people who emailed me were that kind of Christian. But a lot of you let me know that you love the idea that we could just go at the subject. That's fantastic. I'm glad I got that. I was a little touched by how many people in those emails said that they don't have anyone in their lives in real life just around them where they can do that. I wrote back to a couple of people and said, well, what about your pastor? What about your rabbi? And they say, oh no, least of all him. No. He would be calling my parents right away if I even suggested the doubt, much less had a full-out conversation. And a couple of them said things that I know is true. I have been in this world for the world that I'm talking about for a long time. A couple of them said something that I know is true, which is, it wouldn't do any good to talk about the subject with my pastor or my rabbi or my priest because they don't know anything. They know less than I do, much less than you do. So it wouldn't do any good to debate it with them. They don't know anything. Blind leading the blind, the phrase came to mind. But this book it isn't meant to be a celebration. It's not exhortatory. It's meant to be a work of useful Bible study adjacent history. The key that I had to keep remembering as I'm reading this, I really like Tom Wright. I really like his writing. And so I would read this anyway, and I'm glad that I have it because it is really a world unto itself. But I was noticing that naturally I've been rereading it once I fixed the cover. I've been rereading chunks of it. I was rereading chunks of the book without the cover before I fixed it. And I was noticing how many gaps are just stuffed in here with plaster of Paris where there isn't, where you have no right to say that, where you're saying, well, as you can see from the location of the tomb of St. Peter, the building was actually very close to this building or that building, and it's not the tomb of St. Peter, and St. Peter probably didn't exist, and he's not buried there, and no one was paying any attention, and no one cared about institutionalizing these things for probably 150 years after the event. So it's church tradition, fine, absolutely, but N.T. Wright is big on talking about, for instance, the empty tomb and Good Friday, the darkening of the sky on Good Friday, as if we have any idea about specific days, as if we have any historical validation that this particular crucifixion happened, much less on a day, much less what was happening in Jerusalem at the same time on the same day, hour by hour. He and his co-writer will talk about things that happen hour by hour. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. What hour did Julius Caesar's legions cross the Rubicon? What hour did that happen? And that is an actual work of history, for which we have attestation, for which we have independent attestation. People that were in favor of it and people that were against it, and people that were Caesar. Whereas with this, you might as well be out. Okay, so a bunch of rowdy sailors take a young man on board their vessel, and he's gorgeous and he's pretty much naked and he seems sexually compliant. Seems like they can just molest him and he won't mind. He seems very dreamy and sleepy-eyed, and he attracts everyone around him. And so the sailors get rowdy and take all sorts of chances, and then they find that wild animals are leaping across the deck of their ship and devouring them, that monsters are crawling up the oars out of the ocean and attacking them, that they themselves are turning into monsters. And why? Because the young man is Bacchus. The young man is the god Dionysius. You might as well read that myth and say, okay, but what time of day and where exactly in the Straits of Gibraltar did that happen? It's ridiculous. It's all that kind of thing is all through this book. So you have to sort of read it in that way. You have to read it with a gentle smile on your face. This book is couched 100% completely in the historicity, not just of Jesus, but of the whole of the New Testament narrative, loosely so called, because the New Testament, of course, contradicts itself on key elements many, many times. But there is nevertheless, there has been for 2,000 years, an accepted New Testament narrative of what happened. And this book is not challenging that narrative at all. This book is its two authors couching and elaborating on an entire historical worldview that is predicated on things that are not historical. So it's fascinating, and the scholarship, the overview of the scholarship and the archaeology, when these two get to it, those overviews are always really good. They're not deceitful, and they're not cherry picking. That's not where the problem is in this book, if you call it a problem. It's certainly if you are a believing Christian who does not trouble yourself to study, to really unearth the nuts and bolts of the historicity of your faith, you can easily be that. You can easily be a great, totally honest, and incredibly admirable Christian, just resting in the biblical narrative, the New Testament narrative that is reflected in this book. You can do that. You don't need to study the archaeology or the historiography at all. But every time that this book strays onto that ground, it is doing so in the explicit assumption of the truth of the New Testament narrative. You just have to take that. That's all. You'll go crazy if you don't. You just have to take that as written in this book and move on from there. And once you do, boy, oh boy, what a companionable book. I'm glad that I saved it before the cover tore apart completely, although it has that big unsightly rip in it now. But at least now, the gatefold cover there is not going to snag on anything else. I should have done that right away. But anyway, so this was another part of my reading all week long, but also new and forthcoming books, and I wanted to show you some of those. They're all ebooks, so I don't have physical copies to show you, but that's all right. I'm just hoping that the exposure of light here is good. Let's see here. I have it on the Mini Me, the little iPad here, which I was analyzing it the other day and realized that it has almost no storage left. I don't know what I've been thinking buying these iPads. I guess I wasn't thinking about the shifting of my reading to ebooks. I wasn't thinking of that when I got any of these things, and I really need to. I really need to think about that. So if in 2021 I get a new iPad, another iPad, it will be a full-size thing. I have tried the experiment of this mini iPad. I like it. It's really neat, but I want the full-size iPad. I want the real estate of it. You learn, you hone in when you're as technologically promiscuous as I am. You hone in on the things that you like and don't like. And this was intriguing. I wanted to try the form factor, but I want the bigger size. But when the next time I do in 2021, if I get a new iPad, the one thing I'm going to concentrate on is the internal storage. Can't add to the storage of an iPad unless you import things to the cloud, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do if I get a new iPad will be to look at something that has 500, 250 gigs of storage, something like that. Some absurd amount that I will not fill anytime soon. As opposed to having 3 or 4 iPads here that have 17, 18, 25 gigs of storage and are already full. This thing is almost already full. And I can start deleting little bits and pieces to make a little room, but anyway, anyway, I want to show you some of these books, and since I've been manipulating this, it's got my crud all over it, my fingerprints all over it. The first one is internet-related, computer-related. I love reading these kinds of things. Some of them are fairly stupid. I'm hoping this one won't be. It's by James Ball, who's a journalist, and this is The Tangled Web We Weave, Inside the Shadow System That Shapes the Internet. And this is the sort of elevator tagline pitches here. We all know how the internet works in terms of its front parlor. We all use it every day, but how does it work? How do things get from one place to another? Where is this information coming from and stored? Who guards it? Who shapes it? I'm always up for a book like that. I don't know what his angle will be or what his sources are, but I'm always up to give it a try. And then this next one, it's a historical murder mystery. I'm always up for those too. And I especially like historical murder mysteries that have a genuine person from history as the protagonist, no matter how silly that is. I read all the historical murder mysteries that had Jane Austen as the protagonist, even though the very idea is ridiculous. I read a bunch that had Benjamin Franklin as the historical protagonist without the author seeming to care that Franklin had fairly serious health problems and could not have been an adventurous sleuth. There was even a series of, with Johnson and Boswell as a detective pair. Can you imagine? And there is right now an ongoing series with the Mitford sisters, who are, if anything, less equipped to solve murder mysteries than Dr. Johnson and Boswell. Nevertheless, this one is new to me. I don't think I even knew this was coming. This is by Robert Masello, and it is The Haunting of H.G. Wells, in which the British government in the 1880s, I think, calls on the world's foremost novelist, H.G. Wells, and his young lover, Rebecca West, to solve a murder mystery. In real life, with the real H.G. Wells, that wouldn't have worked. Rebecca West, maybe. The real H.G. Wells, you've said, okay, Mr. Wells, I have 20 clues for you, and they're all very intricate, and they seem to bear on each other. And once we go through them, we'll see if your piercing novelist brain can draw any connections. Here's clue number 1. And you say it, and before the sentence is even done, the real historical H.G. Wells will be saying, well, I think I know what the answer to all of this is, just based on what you've told me. Here's what I think. And it'll all just be, there'll be no talking to him. There'll be no getting him to shut up. And there'll certainly be no getting him to pay attention. That's one of the fun things about it, things like this, historical murder mysteries like this, is that you watch the liberties that the author takes with the figure that they've chosen. Like, for instance, David Morrell did a few books with Thomas de Quincey as a ratiocinator, as a detective, a historical detective. De Quincey would have been terrible at that. Absolutely terrible at that. A ridiculous farce of a thing. And Morrell almost makes him one in those books. He is still a ridiculous figure throughout. And you look at it and you think, well, okay, all right, fine. But the historical people who would have made good historical sleuths are always the also-ran characters. In any historical period, anytime, anything like that, it's never Aristotle. Okay? It's never Aristotle. Those people, every minute of their time is taken up with writing. Or in the more recent era, when we have lots and lots of historical documentation, every minute of their time is taken up with historical documentation. So it isn't believable anymore. It's no more believable than if Queen Elizabeth II were a sleuth in a series of crime mysteries, which she has been. And I've read those too. You want somebody like Leigh Hunt. He's an almost known. Historically minded people will maybe recognize his name. The general reader will not. He would have been in a perfect position. Or Trelawney, Byron's Jackal, would have been in a perfect position to also, not only to solve crimes, because he had a very nitpicky brain, but also for action. Trelawney could hold his own in a tough corner. Whereas, what are you going to do if the villain turns on Dr. Johnson? I mean, what are you going to do? Johnson would be bigger than he is, but no idea of fisticuffs, and of the very great likelihood to wander off in the middle of a fight. So you're never going to get that. Like, for instance, in this book, the author would probably have been better suited to have Rebecca West just be the main character, but H.G. Wells has the name recognition. So I'm looking forward to seeing what liberties will be taken here. That always fascinates me. I don't ever get priggish about it. Even when the liberties are just flat out falsities, where I'm reading and thinking, okay, well, but that isn't true. That couldn't possibly have happened. It doesn't matter to me. I will be looking at the whole thing. How well does Robert Masello evoke the time period? How well does he evoke what the details we know about Wells's life up until the point where this mystery happens? The treatment of Rebecca West in fiction. I don't think I've ever read Rebecca West in fiction. So I'll be looking forward to all of that. I'll just take it all as one thing. This next one is a bit frustrating because I don't have it. This is a picture that I took from the web. I don't have the book. I don't have the ebook, and I don't have the physical book. And in this case, I want the physical book. And this is Pride and Prejudice, curated by Barbara Heller, who had the brilliant idea. This is what it's going to look like. She had the brilliant idea to do a hardcover reprint of Pride and Prejudice in which all of the correspondence of all of the characters, you know, when you're reading Pride and Prejudice, you get to a letter from somebody, no matter who it is, famously, of course, Mr. Darcy's letter, but lots of others too. You realize in a situation like this, how suffused with letters this book is. Can we get the lighting to cooperate? There we go, just a bit. Barbara Heller had the great idea to make the letters in this version of Pride and Prejudice actual letters on paper with calligraphy, as if you are encountering the actual letter when you read the book. What a great idea. OMG. And of course I want the physical copy of this, but I haven't received it yet, and I don't know that I will. I believe I've already requested it. I'll request it again, just in case. I don't want to make a nuisance of myself. But it figures into a Friday Reads for a very good reason, although a psychologically warped reason, which is that knowing that this edition is out there with the facsimile letters is all I need to read Pride and Prejudice again. I'm going to read Pride and Prejudice again this weekend from start to finish. I'm not going to pick and choose, just going to read the whole thing from start to finish. And the reason I'm making these woebegone faces is because this will probably be roughly my 1 millionth read of Pride and Prejudice. There is no reason for me to do this, but this is all the temptation that I need. I'd love to see it, though. I'd love to see, like, for instance, when you get Mr. Collins, you'll want his cramped, technically form-perfect penmanship. Will you want rougher penmanship for the less educated people? I want to see it all, and I'll ask again for the book. Then Alex, at What Page Are You On? is a wonderful booktuber. He just did a Q&A for, I think, 1,000 subscribers. No, 3,000 subscribers. It was a really good Q&A. He is big into reading literary fiction, modern Brooklyn-based literary fiction, upper middle class Connecticut divorce or Nigerian immigrant literary fiction. The type of stuff where the insights are terrible. There is no plot development because your main character is perfect from page one. And there, most of all, is no conclusion. The books just end. The characters just walk off the stage. There's nothing like a dramatic arc. There's nothing like payoff of any kind. There is no, in fact, storytelling artifice involved. So you read one of these books and your overwhelming impression is, if I had an idle weekend, I could write this same kind of crap. And the reason I mention Alex is because he loves this stuff, and he's not alone. Oh my God, everybody in Williamsburg, they trip over themselves for each one of these new people. And I have made new books my remit, new books of a great number of kinds, the 15 or so genres that I read. So in a doff of the hat to Alex, I will be reading Transcendent Kingdom by Yagi Asi, whose previous book, Homegoing, was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. It was venerated, not Sally Rooney level venerated, but it still has its own commissioned panel on the Sistine Chapel. The American Literary Association still convinced the Italian government to slop whitewash over Michelangelo for a panel of the Sistine Chapel in order to paint some relevant scenes from Homegoing. So it had a fair amount of veneration, but of course the Republic of Ireland has been renamed the Republic of Sally Rooney. You don't get that kind of veneration. I was going to say only once in a generation, but of course it comes around every season when there's a new bandwagon to jump on. Huh? Right? Used to be there were the Bering Strait. That has been renamed the Karl Ove Knausgaard Strait, but it may be renamed next year when somebody comes along with another gigantic pile of poop. This is almost certainly going to stink. It almost certainly is. There'll almost certainly be no character development. There'll almost certainly be pauses in the narrative where the author stops, turns, looks out at the page and says, well, I'm pausing. Genuflect. I'll wait. Get down on your knee or you're ostracized from social media. Okay, you genuflect. All right. Stand back up and continue reading my boring, wet-washed, sea-level, unedited prose, and I'll let you know when you have to genuflect again. I could be wrong. Maybe this author will surprise me. If you get rich and famous doing the crap that she did in her last book, I don't see why you would change that. I don't see what could convince you to. But it's a new book. I will give it a try. And then this next one, I am a glutton for punishment, I admit, but I read all of these things. I am endlessly curious about these things. Even if my instincts tell me that I'm not going to like it, or that it's going to be bad, or both, I will still read it. I am endlessly curious in that way. This is by cable news talking hairdo Joe Scarborough. Some of you may have seen YouTube clips of his show Morning Joe that he does with Zbigniew Brzezinski's daughter, Mika. And Joe is clearly the star of the show, and the narrative revolves around him. And he is a pompous windbag and a bit of a nitwit. And every episode that you watch is characterized by, at some point or other, him saying, and what I want to say about this, it's just professorial throat clearing, but he gets stuck on and sometimes they'll cut to commercial break and they'll come back and he's still going and no one can interrupt him because he's the star of the show. He's this hairdo peacock. But he has a book. Now, he didn't have anything to do with the writing or the researching of this book. He said to some gopherish eager beaver attendant, I like that idea. And the gopherish attendant went off, and lo, it was made into a book. And it's called Saving Freedom, Truman, the Cold War, and the Fight for Western Civilization. Freedom was never in danger under Truman's watch. Except maybe the freedom of 100,000 Japanese women and children and old people to go on living, as opposed to being killed in a torrent of fire and radiation. This is probably going to be rather dumb. This is probably going to be the kind of primary color historical moralistic narrative that terrified underling knows Joe Scarborough wants to put his name to. I don't think that Joe Scarborough will ever read the end result, but nevertheless, you don't want anybody coming at him on air and saying, hey, this thing on page 100 of your book is really scandalous. This is probably that. This is probably a very pious mom and apple pie, we love Harry Truman type thing that won't deal with the complexities of the period at all. Not at all. Not whatsoever. Freedom was never in danger when Harry Truman was president. Not in America. Not American freedom. So saving freedom makes me wonder right there. And it's a salient reminder. I have bashed, for instance, the Bill O'Reilly school of these kind of bilgewater fake history endlessly on this channel. And this serves as a salient reminder that this kind of partisan lying about history happens on both sides of the aisle. Okay, so I'll read it, and I will read it hoping the whole time for, I don't know, some grain of insight, not Joe Scarborough's, but that terrified underling who might get mentioned in the acknowledgement section. Something here or there maybe might happen in it that maybe might be, it won't take any time at all to read. And there might be something that renovates it just a bit. It doesn't usually happen, but as my old friend Deb has told you when the times when she's been on this channel, I will read anything. So I have more time at my disposal to read, like I mentioned at the beginning of this interminable video. But I tell you, me and some of the other members of the OGBG, you put us in front of a camera and we'll just keep talking. If we're talking about books, we'll just keep talking. So that is basically the outline of my Friday reads, is that. I've got some of those forthcoming books to read. I've got some printed, actual paper and ink forthcoming books that are also going to be on my list. And also, this Friday Reads is the whole weekend. That's what Friday Reads are like. That could easily be changed by the mail that I get today or tomorrow. So you never know. There's a certain amount of flexibility that could be changed or could at least be added to. Because I'll be reading for huge slots of this weekend. Almost all of the weekend we'll be reading. So anyway, that's my Friday Reads. I'd love to know what you're working on this weekend. What is interest of you. And I'm going to wrap this up. It's gone on quite long enough. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.